November 13th, 1942. The waters off Guadalcanal. The light cruiser USS Juno takes a torpedo hit from Japanese submarine Y-26. The warhead detonates directly beneath the ship's forward magazines, the compartments where ammunition is stored. What happens next is instantaneous and catastrophic. The magazines explode. The entire forward section of the ship vaporizes. A column of fire and debris shoots hundreds of feet into the air. When it clears, USS Juno is gone. 687 men were aboard. The explosion killed most instantly, but not all. Approximately 100 men survived the initial blast. They were thrown into the water, wounded, burned, coated in fuel oil, but alive. Nearby American ships, part of the same task force, saw them, counted them, watched them wave for help, and then they sailed away. For 8 days, those survivors floated in shark-infested waters. No rescue came, no search planes appeared. The Navy knew where they were. They had the coordinates. They had eyewitness reports from multiple ships. But they made a decision. The submarine threat was too high, so the survivors would have to wait. By the time rescue finally arrived, only 10 men remained alive. 677 died. Most of those deaths occurred in the 8 days after the sinking, as men slowly succumbed to injuries, exposure, dehydration, and shark attacks. Among the dead were 5 brothers: George, Francis, Joseph, Madison, and Albert Sullivan, all serving together aboard Juno, despite Navy regulations discouraging family members from serving on the same ship. When their parents asked the Navy what happened to their sons, the Navy told them they were missing in action. The Navy knew they were dead. They had known for days. They had known since the moment Juno exploded. But telling the truth would require explaining why rescue was delayed, why men died when their deaths could have been prevented, and why Navy protocols prioritized operational security over saving lives. So they lied, and they kept lying, for months. This is the story of USS Juno. It is not the heroic combat narrative the Navy wanted. It is the account where men died because the institution that sent them to war decided they were not worth the risk of rescue. USS Juno was an Atlanta-class light cruiser commissioned in February 1942. She was fast and well-armed, designed for anti-aircraft defense and surface combat. Her length was 541 feet. Her displacement was 8,340 tons. Her crew numbered 687 officers and enlisted men. Among that crew were the 5 Sullivan brothers from Waterloo, Iowa: George, 27, Francis, 26, Joseph, 23, Madison, 22, and Albert, 20. They had enlisted together after Pearl Harbor, requesting assignment to the same ship. The Navy initially refused. There was an informal policy against family members serving together, meant to prevent entire families from being wiped out in a single incident. The Sullivans insisted. They threatened to enlist in different branches if the Navy would not accommodate them. In early 1942, with recruitment pressure intense and public morale critical, the Navy relented. The 5 brothers were assigned to USS Juno. The Navy even used them for recruiting propaganda, publishing photographs of all 5 together, smiling, representing American family values and patriotic service. What the Navy did not tell the public was that putting 5 brothers on one ship violated their own risk management principles. What they did not tell the Sullivan parents was that if Juno went down, the entire family would be devastated. On November 12th and 13th, 1942, Juno participated in the naval battle of Guadalcanal, a chaotic nighttime engagement between American and Japanese forces. The battle was brutal. Ships on both sides took heavy damage. Juno herself was hit by a torpedo that damaged but did not sink her. After the battle, Juno joined a group of damaged American ships, limping back toward safer waters for repairs. Also in this group were USS Helena, USS San Francisco, and several destroyers. All were damaged. All were vulnerable. All were moving slowly through waters known to have Japanese submarines. At approximately 11 a.m. on November 13th, Japanese submarine WOI-26 fired a spread of torpedoes at the formation. One struck USS Juno. The torpedo hit forward, near the magazines. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. Witnesses on nearby ships described a massive fireball that rose several hundred feet. The entire forward third of Juno disintegrated. The rest of the ship broke apart and sank in less than a minute. From the USS Helena, sailors watched in horror. One moment Juno was there, the next she was gone, replaced by a cloud of smoke and debris. And then, as the smoke cleared, they saw men in the water, dozens of them, maybe 100, clinging to debris, waving, calling for help. The explosion had killed most of Juno's crew instantly, but a significant number, those who had been on deck, in aft compartments, or lucky enough to be thrown clear, had survived. Captain Gilbert Hoover, commanding the task force from USS Helena, faced a decision. His ships were damaged. They were in submarine-infested waters. The submarine that had just sunk Juno was likely still nearby, possibly lining up another shot. Standard doctrine said, do not stop. Do not make yourself a stationary target. Get to safety. Then organize rescue. But there were men in the water, American sailors, maybe 100 of them, visible, alive, calling for help. Hoover made his decision. The task force would not stop. They would continue to base, report the sinking, and request search aircraft to rescue the survivors. It was, by the book, the correct tactical decision. Stopping would risk the remaining ships and thousands of additional lives, but it meant leaving those men behind. The sailors on Helena and the other ships watched as they sailed away. They could hear the men in the water. Some were screaming, some were singing to keep their spirits up. Some were just floating silently, stunned by what had happened. And then the ships were over the horizon and the survivors of USS Juno were alone. When Captain Hoover reached base, he filed his report. USS Juno had been sunk. Estimated survivors, 100 plus. Precise coordinates were provided. Recommendation, immediate air search and rescue. That report went up the chain of command to Admiral William Halsey, commanding South Pacific Forces, to his staff, to Naval Intelligence. And then something happened that survivors' families would spend decades trying to understand. Nothing. No search aircraft were dispatched that day, or the next day, or the day after that. The official explanation, provided years later, was confusion and communication failures. Multiple units thought other units were handling the rescue. Priorities shifted due to ongoing combat operations. Resources were stretched thin. But the survivors' families would eventually obtain documents declassified decades later showing something different. The Navy knew where the survivors were. They had the coordinates. They had ships and aircraft available. What they also had was a decision that rescuing 100 men was not worth the risk of losing aircraft or ships to Japanese forces still active in the area. So the men were left in the water for 8 days. The survivors of USS Juno faced conditions that are difficult to comprehend. They were floating in the open ocean with no food, no fresh water, no shelter from the sun. Many were injured from the explosion. Most were coated in fuel oil that caused chemical burns and contaminated any water they tried to drink. During the day, the tropical sun burned their skin. At night, they froze. Dehydration set in within hours, hallucinations followed within days. And then there were the sharks. The waters around Guadalcanal are home to oceanic white-tip sharks, aggressive scavengers that are known to attack survivors of maritime disasters. Within the first few days, sharks began circling the survivors, and then they attacked. Men who were injured, who were weak, who couldn't defend themselves, went first. The others tried to form defensive groups, linking arms, kicking at sharks, but exhaustion and dehydration made that impossible to maintain. By day 3, survivors were dying faster from exposure and injuries than from shark attacks. By day 5, men were going mad from drinking seawater. By day 7, most were unconscious or delirious. When rescue aircraft finally spotted survivors on November 21st, 8 days after the sinking, only 10 men remained alive. 10 out of at least 100 who had survived the initial explosion. One of those 10 was Seaman Alan Hayne. His account, given years later, described watching men die one by one, watching friends slip beneath the surface, watching sharks take the bodies, and watching the sky, hour after hour, day after day, waiting for rescue that did not come. Watching. He never forgave the Navy for that delay. None of the survivors did. Never. All 5 Sullivan brothers died in those 8 days. George, Francis, and Joseph were killed in the initial explosion. Their bodies were never recovered. Never recovered. Madison and Albert survived the blast. They made it into the water. Witnesses, other survivors, saw them alive on the first day. Madison was helping organize the wounded. Albert was trying to collect debris to build makeshift flotation aids. Survived. By the 3rd day, both were showing symptoms of severe exposure. By the 5th day, Madison was delirious. By the 7th day, Albert was gone. Severe exposure. Madison Sullivan was the last of the 5 brothers to die. According to survivor testimony, he was still alive on day 8, barely conscious, when one of the rescue aircraft finally appeared overhead. He died before the rescue boat reached him. Last of the brothers. When the Navy notified Thomas and Aletta Sullivan that their sons were missing in action on November 13th, 1942, they already knew all 5 were dead. Missing in action. The explosion that sank Juno was witnessed by multiple ships. The blast was so massive that survival seemed impossible, but Navy protocol required official confirmation before declaring casualties. So the Sullivans received the missing telegram, and then they waited, for weeks, while the Navy investigated, while reports were filed, while the cover-up began. They waited. It was not until January 1943, 2 months after the sinking, that the Navy officially informed the Sullivans that all 5 of their sons were dead. Officially informed. But here is what the Navy did not tell them. Madison and Albert had survived the sinking. They had been alive for days. They could have been rescued if search aircraft had been sent immediately. Could have been rescued. The Navy never disclosed that. They let the Sullivan parents believe their sons had died instantly in the explosion. Heroic combat deaths. Quick, painless, honorable. Not 8 days of slow boat death from exposure, dehydration, and shark attacks, while rescue was delayed for operational reasons. The truth did not come out for decades, not until survivors started talking, not until documents were declassified, not until researchers started asking why only 10 men survived when witnesses saw more than 100 in the water. By then, Thomas and Aletta Sullivan were dead. They never knew that 2 of their sons could have been saved. The Navy's handling of the Juno sinking became a case study in institutional failure and cover-up. First, they misled the families about the circumstances of death. The Sullivans and hundreds of other families were told their loved ones died in combat, technically true, but omitting the critical detail that many survived the sinking and died preventable deaths. Second, they changed their story multiple times. Initially, all hands were said lost in the explosion. Then, some survivors but rescue attempts failed. Then, survivors existed but could not be reached due to enemy activity. Each version was slightly closer to the truth, but still avoiding the core issue, the Navy chose not to rescue them immediately. Third, they used the Sullivan brothers for propaganda while hiding how they actually died. The Navy commissioned a destroyer, USS the Sullivans, named after the brothers. They produced recruiting materials featuring the 5 siblings. They held memorial services and presented the family with medals, all while knowing that Madison and Albert died slowly in the water, waiting for rescue that was deliberately delayed. When survivor testimony began emerging in the 1950s and 1960s, the Navy dismissed it. They claimed memories were unreliable. They suggested survivors were confused about timelines. They maintained that rescue was attempted as quickly as operationally possible. But in 2010, when the National Archives released previously classified documents from the Guadalcanal campaign, the truth became undeniable. Captain Hoover's initial report clearly stated approximately 100 survivors were seen. Admiral Halsey's headquarters acknowledged receiving the report. Staff meeting minutes showed discussion of rescue options. And the decision, documented in operational logs, was to delay search and rescue pending clarification of tactical situation. They knew men were dying in the water, and they decided saving them was not worth the risk. In 2018, the wreck of USS Juno was finally located by research vessel Petrel, funded by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. The ship lies at a depth of approximately 4,200 meters off Guadalcanal. The wreck confirmed what survivors had described: massive explosion damage to the forward section. The magazines had detonated with such force that the bow was essentially obliterated. No one in the forward third of the ship could have survived. But the stern and midship sections, while heavily damaged, showed structural areas where crew members could have survived the blast. Compartments remained intact long enough for men to escape. Debris fields suggested equipment and materials that could have supported survivors. The wreck proved that the initial survivor count, more than 100, was plausible. The explosion, while catastrophic, was not immediately fatal to everyone aboard, which made the 8-day delay even more inexcusable. The families of Juno's crew have been fighting for accountability for over 80 years. Multiple petitions have been filed requesting the Navy officially acknowledge the rescue delay and apologize for misleading families. The Navy's response has been consistent. The decisions made in 1942 were based on the tactical situation at the time. Captain Hoover followed doctrine. Admiral Halsey's staff made reasonable calls given limited resources and ongoing combat operations. No one acted with malicious intent, but intent is not the issue. The issue is that 677 men died, many unnecessarily, because the Navy prioritized operational security over rescue. Then the Navy lied about it. In 2016, the Sullivan family, descendants of the 5 brothers, formally requested that the Navy reopen the investigation into Juno's sinking and the rescue delay. They wanted acknowledgement that Madison and Albert survived the blast. They wanted recognition that those 2 brothers died waiting for help that was deliberately withheld. The Navy declined. The Navy stated that all relevant information had been disclosed, that no new investigation was warranted, and that the matter was closed. But the families disagree because new evidence keeps emerging. In 2019, a researcher at the National World War II Museum found additional documents in Navy archives. Those documents include communications between Halsey's headquarters in Washington, showing that senior leadership was aware of the Juno survivors within hours of the sinking. One memo, dated November 14, 1942, the day after Juno sank, references approximately 100 survivors from CL-52, Juno's hull number, and discusses rescue feasibility given current enemy submarine activity. The memo concludes that rescue should be deferred pending tactical assessment. That is the smoking gun. The Navy knew there were 100 survivors, they discussed rescuing them, and they chose to wait. They waited for 8 days while men died. The online communities dedicated to naval history are overwhelmingly critical of the Navy's handling of Juno. The consensus among historians, veterans, and researchers is that the rescue delay was unjustifiable. Yes, submarine threats were real. Yes, the tactical situation was complex. But 8 days? 8 days to organize a rescue when you have the exact coordinates and multiple survivor witnesses. Multiple naval commanders from World War II, interviewed years later, said they would have dispatched search aircraft within 24 hours, regardless of submarine risk. The potential to save 100 lives justified the risk of losing 1 aircraft. Admiral Nimitz himself, when asked about the Juno case in the 1960s, acknowledged that in retrospect, rescue efforts should have been prioritized differently. That was as close to an admission as the Navy has ever come. But it is not enough for the families. They do not want retrospective assessment. They want acknowledgement that the Navy failed those men, that the institution made a choice that cost 667 lives, and that they lied about it for decades. As of 2024, USS Juno remains at the bottom of the ocean. The wreck is protected as a war grave. Diving is prohibited. The ship and the men who died with her rest in darkness, 4 kilometers below the surface. The 10 survivors, all now deceased, spent their lives telling the story of those 8 days. They testified at veterans forums, they wrote memoirs. They gave interviews to historians and documentarians, and consistently they said the same thing. We could have been saved, we should have been saved, and the Navy knew it. The Sullivan family continues their advocacy. Descendants of the 5 brothers maintain a memorial foundation. They speak at Navy events. They tell the story of George, Francis, Joseph, Madison, and Albert. They ask one question that the Navy has never adequately answered. If the service could not protect those men in life, why cannot it at least tell the truth about their deaths? The technology exists to fully document the Juno wreck. Modern deep-sea ROVs could examine every section, catalog every artifact, potentially even recover remains for burial. The Navy has the resources, the families have requested it, but permission has been denied. The wreck is a war grave, they are told. Disturbing it would be disrespectful. Yet the families argue, how is leaving men in the darkness respectful? How is refusing to acknowledge how they died honorable? How is protecting institutional reputation more important than honoring the dead? These are questions without good answers, because the truth is uncomfortable. The truth is that USS Juno's crew, including 5 brothers whose story became American legend, died not just from enemy action, but from institutional failure. They died because someone decided their lives were not worth the risk of rescue. And then the Navy spent 80 years avoiding responsibility for that decision. 687 men sailed on USS Juno in November 1942. 677 died. 10 came home. And the Navy told their families that everything possible was done to save them. That is the LIE that matters, not the tactical decisions made in combat, not the risk assessments or operational priorities. The lie was telling families their loved ones died instantly when many did not. The lie was saying rescue was impossible when it was just delayed. The lie was using 5 brothers as propaganda while hiding that 2 of them died slowly, waiting for help that never came. USS Juno sits 4,000 meters down. The men are still there, the truth is still there, and the Navy still will not fully acknowledge what happened 82 years ago in the waters off Guadalcanal, when ships saw men dying and sailed away, when survivors spent 8 days waiting, when only 10 lived to tell what the others went through. The Sullivan brothers became American heroes. Their story inspired recruitment. A ship was named for them, movies were made, but Madison and Albert died in the water, watching the sky for rescue planes that did not come for 8 days. That is the truth. That is what the Navy does not want in the official record, because it means admitting that sometimes the institution fails the men it sends to war. Instead of owning that failure, it builds monuments, tells sanitized stories, and hopes no one asks too many questions. But the families keep asking. The survivors told their stories before they died. The documents keep being declassified. And eventually, the full truth of USS Juno will be undeniable, not the propaganda version, the real one, where 677 men died and the Navy chose not to save them.